Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the pros and cons of an electoral pact between Labour and the Liberal Democrats. Not a post-election alliance, that's another matter, but a progressive alliance pact for the elections themselves. I'd also like to discuss why, although the calls for this were quite loud a couple of years ago, seem to be a little bit quieter now. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So when it comes to the potential for cooperation between Labour and the Liberal Democrats, all the talk is for after the election at the moment, which is fine. After all, Starmer has recently been trolling the Tory media by refusing to rule out a post-election pact. But the current polling gives Labour like a 200-seat majority, with the Conservatives being left with just 150 seats. For the record, I don't think this is what the final picture will look like, but it is what the current picture is, and it would take a truly seismic chain of events to disrupt the current course, which is for at least a solid Labour majority at least. Labour are focusing very carefully on the voters. The Conservatives are so busy squabbling with themselves. It's really hard to imagine anything happening to boost the Conservatives by enough to prevent a majority Labour government when they're doing absolutely nothing to help themselves. But what if there was a way to really crush the Tories? The local elections showed the way. It wasn't just a story of tactical voting. There was plenty of evidence for the impact of that. There was also evidence of electoral pacts between the main progressive parties in England, albeit unofficial pacts, none of them admitted to it. And the shining beacon of this behaviour was Bracknell Forest in Berkshire. Very much Tory territory. In 12 of the 15 wards being contested, only one of the three progressive parties was represented. This was a council where 37 of the 41 seats were Conservative last month, the other four being Labour. The Liberal Democrats and Greens had no seats. Now, of those 41 council seats, only 10 of them are occupied by Conservatives. It's now a Labour council, and the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party both have representation. There will be other factors as well, but what clearly happened here is that the local Labour, Liberal Democrat and Green parties decided to give anti-Tory voters one option in the wards that were being contested with the Conservatives. It's what some want to happen in the general election. Now, it's more difficult to do this in a general election. The argument for not standing candidates in local elections is that it's a waste of money. We need to focus our resources here and here. But none of the parties are so strapped for cash that they can't afford to stand candidates in every seat in Britain, even in no-hope seats. Labour would certainly be laughed out of any press conference where they claimed to be standing candidates down in order to save money. Other difficulties as well. Labour would have to change their constitution, and this particular change may meet with some significant resistance. Party members can be a little bit tribal, you may have noticed. I've said before, non-partisan voters get frustrated, understandably frustrated, with political parties that have significant areas of common interest not working together against the Tories. But there's a reason that they are different political parties in the first place. They may agree on some things and may all be appalled at what the Conservatives do in government, but they disagree on many issues as well. And there's also mistrust. There's quite a lot in Labour convinced that the Liberal Democrats would absolutely jump into bed to form another coalition with the Conservatives if the parliamentary arithmetic allowed for it. It's a complete nonsense, of course. The experience was so harrowing for the Liberal Democrats, there's zero chance of doing that for like another generation at least. And even then, I reckon they'd think twice. But some in Labour will see a tactical vote for a Liberal Democrat candidate as being no different to voting in such a way as to allow the Conservative candidate to win. And the tribalism, it's not just in Labour. There are similarly unhelpful views in the Liberal Democrats and Greens as well. But on one level, you could still say, well, this is unfortunate, but shouldn't rule out the electoral pacts. Like, people will understand that these tribal voters would just not vote at all if their party isn't represented, or vote for a fringe party or an independent. But as they were only going to vote for a no-chance candidate anyway, it's still a net benefit to focus less tribal voters, less partisan voters, on the single anti-Tory candidate with a chance. If this were carried out on a Britain-wide scale, at least England-wide scale, in those seats where the Tories currently hold it, we're not talking about in other seats, we're not talking about in every seat, we're just talking about in the seats where the Conservatives currently hold it, then it would inevitably lead to more Conservative losses. In fact, the very concept would scare the shit out of the Tories. They are well aware that they benefit from centre and left-wing votes splitting themselves across multiple parties. They know that they gain from not having their own vote split on the right. Or at least that was the case before the Brexit Party came along. Imagine the scene. Labour changed their constitution at the annual conference later this year. The Lib Dems get on board. For each currently Conservative constituency, they resolve to only stand a candidate if they are polling to be the main challenger to the Conservative candidate. You might also say it would be helpful if the Green Party did likewise, but being fair, they don't actually stand to gain any new MPs out of such an arrangement, so you can appreciate there's nothing really in it for them. But both Labour and the Lib Dems would gain extra MPs. Both of them would get more MPs. So you could argue it's in their interest. The Conservatives evaluate the situation, then they factor in Reform UK, and then go and find a nice corner to go and have a cry in. Be utterly devastating. On a national scale, it could obliterate the Tories. Right now, Tory MPs and commentators are talking about maybe restricting Labour to minority government. This is not going to happen. This is not what the current polling says at all. In fact, the current polling shows Labour winning a very sizable majority. But with an electoral pact where the anti-Tory vote is centred on a single candidate, at least in England, the Tories face utter devastation. So why not do it? Well, I've discussed some of the tribal feelings within Labour which would prove resistive. And these people are not easily dismissed because many would be the Labour members who go out, volunteer much of their time and energy during election campaigns, canvassing. You know, if you can't persuade them that this is in their interest, it's really a non-starter. But although this can appear self-defeating, in reality, even if Labour members and the leadership were in favour and went for it, we may actually find now that the Liberal Democrats aren't interested. Because a couple of years ago, there were some pretty loud calls for an electoral pact. Those voices are much less numerous now. Why? Well, a couple of years ago, the situation was that the election was looking a bit tight. It looked like Labour could be the largest party, but couldn't get a majority. But of course, in an environment like that, we've seen it before, the Conservatives could well say to people that a hung parliament would be chaotic. You need to vote for the only party that can actually form a majority. We couldn't really risk Conservatives retaining power. Too much damage being done already. But on current polling, you know, consider what this electoral pact would do for the Liberal Democrats, for example. It would give them more MPs, absolutely. But the point of winning seats is to increase your parliamentary influence. But given that Labour would gain more seats from such an arrangement, and they're already on for a big majority, the move would risk giving the Liberal Democrats more seats but less power, and Labour build up to a grotesque majority. The current polling of a 200-seat majority could be made much more likely by this move. Being clear, even as a Labour member, I'm not sure that's good for democracy. See, I want Labour to have a large majority so they can implement reforms as quickly as possible, and there's lots to do, and have a cushion to have a good chance to win the following election as well. But if they actually won a 200-seat majority, then that's basically 2/3 of all the seats in Parliament. Parliamentary process would be like a joke. 2/3 of every select committee would be Labour MPs, meaning less critical scrutiny of the government. Because there are three groups of people who might be in favour of this electoral pact. Labour supporters, Lib Dem supporters, and then just good old-fashioned non-partisan anti-Tories. It's in Labour's interest. It's always in Labour's interest. But not enough of the active membership see that. It is in the interests of the Lib Dems in terms of seats, but not necessarily in terms of influence if it means giving Labour an unwieldy majority. There's certainly no chance of an alliance if Labour get 200 seats. Like, Lib Dems, do you want an alliance? Why? As for anti-Tories, if Labour are on for a majority anyway, it's not really in their interest at all because the Tories will definitely be in opposition. This is why I think the calls have become a bit quieter. Sounds like a great idea. It will crush the Tories underfoot. It may also be highly amusing to see them engage in blind panic. I mean, look at the meltdown we're enjoying at the news that Labour are likely to be giving the vote to millions of settled EU citizens at the next election. Just look at their meltdown right now. Imagine what would happen at the prospect that the Tories will be contesting every single seat, in England at least, against Reform UK and just one candidate from either Labour or the Lib Dems. Every copy of the Daily Express would probably spontaneously combust. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.